Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsco.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I am very excited because I have Tom Peters with me, who is author of numerous business books, 18 in total, I believe now. And he's also a speaker, but he's best known for his 1982 book, which was In Search of Excellence, which is co-authored by Robert H. Waterman. Now, we're not doing a blast from the past. We're actually going to talk about his new book. But first and foremost, Tom, welcome to the podcast.
Why, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here.
So, Tom, I've been asking different people about yourself and your work and your books and things, and given that we sometimes find ourselves surrounded by the company of millennials who have a lot less grey hair than I do, some of them actually haven't come across some of your work. So for the benefit of our listeners and readers who are not familiar with your work, can you tell us a bit about you and a bit about the work that you do?
Well, if you go back to that first book, In Search of Excellence, I worked for McKinsey and Company, and the Americans who had ruled the roost after World War II were suddenly in the late 70s getting kicked around by the Japanese. And we were doing a lot of finance and a lot of marketing, and the Japanese had the nerve to make cars that actually worked when you turned on the ignition. And a couple of Harvard professors by the name of Bob Hayes and Bill Abernathy wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review called Managing Our Way to Economic Decline.
Right.
And it was a direct attack on their institution. But they said what I just said, too much time on finance and marketing, not enough time on the people who actually make the product and ensure its quality. And so to make a long story short, and it is pretty long, I and Bob Waterman ended up running around the country and looking for companies that work. We said, management's in trouble, but for heaven's sakes, it's a big country. There are companies that work. And we came up with about 30 who did. Incidentally, since I'm talking to you, we did have a pretty good international contingent, but we didn't think it was good enough to be called a real sample. So we ended up just with the American companies in that first book. And the stuff that we discovered was about as obvious as the end of your nose.
Yes.
If you want to make a good quality product, you have to care about the people who make the product.
Sure.
If you want to stay on top of things, you have to try a lot of things fast. But the great, I don't know, you call it frustration or what have you, I believe the new book does a relatively decent job of really addressing the technology change that we're facing, but these ideas that I talked about long ago still have not been fully or effectively implemented by an awful lot of companies.
Sure.
I mean, when people summarize my work, they often say, put people first.
Yeah.
And it's taken me 38 years and I haven't won the battle, but put people first. And it's more important in the age of artificial intelligence or what have you, because anything that's routine or rote is going to be done by software. Yeah. So what's the human stuff that really differentiates what you're doing?
Absolutely. So before we get stuck into the book, Tom, what I've wanted to say, we met at a Thinkers 50 event in London.
That's correct.
At I think it was late November, early December, and you received a Lifetime Achievement Award. I just want to say congratulations on that, and congratulations on the last 30 years, because I've been a follower of your work, and I think you are a loud voice for reason and for just good stuff, which is brilliant. So I just raised my hat to you on that.
Well, since you're using the English language casually, there's nothing I would rather be described as than somebody doing good stuff.
Excellent. Thank you.
I even say that in the leadership chapter in the book. I say you won't find any vision, you won't find any of this, or what you will find is some stuff, some stuff that works.
Absolutely. So now let's get on to this new book. I mean, you recently published a new book called The Excellence Dividend. I mean, so can you give us a little bit of an overview of the book and who's it for and what's the main thesis and why it came about? I mean, is it like a bookend of a series of books in terms of you started with In Search of Excellence and now this is almost turning the page on excellence, or is it just like an update?
It certainly isn't turning the page on excellence. In a way, you could say that in 1982, excellence was something that really made a difference and you should do it and it's a good idea and for heaven's sakes, try to do it. What I'm actually saying today is that's the only thing that is going to save your job or save your company.
Right.
Because the technology that is being implemented, as I said a minute ago, is going to do all the rote stuff and even more than the rote stuff. So how do you stand out?
Sure.
How do you become memorable? I mean, in the very beginning of the book, we feature a British company, Metro Bank.
Yes.
They were originally Commerce Bank in the U.S. They were sold to TD Bank for close to $9 billion. And then they brought themselves over to the U.K., the first chartered high street bank in 140 years or something like that. And all the big banks, American banks, British banks, probably German banks, and so on, are closing branches and throwing people out on the street. And I refuse to say that they're laying people off. Yeah. They're closing branches and they are throwing people out on the street. What Metro Bank said was, wow, let's create a fabulous in-branch experience. Let's make branches that are exciting and bright red. Let's have people who are insanely well-trained, who are desperate to give you a hand. Let's have dog bowls and dog biscuits, and come on, bring your dog in. And, you know, the assumption was that some of this crazy American stuff wouldn't work across the Atlantic, but wrong. I mean, first of all, I think the British like their dogs more than the Americans do. So that was a real winner.
Yeah.
But on top of that, when a branch opens, they effectively have circuses and thousands of people show up. So it's really bottom line, between Commerce in the U.S. and now Metro in the U.K., while the big banks throw people on the street, Commerce, Metro have created 17,000 good new jobs.
Yeah.
And so it can be done. And it can be done even in something. I mean, banking would be the ultimate example, wouldn't it, of something you'd say, this is transactional.
Yeah, sure.
You know, the only thing that matters is that device you've got in your pocket and how quickly I can deal with whatever. Well, they've demonstrated that if you really put on the greatest show on earth and really help people in a way finance is personal.
Sure.
You know, not other than your health, it's the second most personal thing that exists. And so they've made it a personal experience. And, I love the fact that I'm starting with them. It's the greatest way to demonstrate what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that, and that sort of explains why the book is dedicated to Vernon Hill, based on some of the work that he's done. I tell you what I love about Metro Bank. I love the fact that it listens to its customers. It thinks about its customers. It thinks about kind of banking and what they want to do, and that sort of played out in its opening hours, where it's open early, so you can go there before work. It's open late, so you can go there afterwards. It's even open on a Sunday morning.
Yes,
for crying out loud.
I love it.
And I just think about it and just go, that's just so simple, but brilliant.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I've also had the opportunity to become close friends with Duffy, as the mascot was called, the dog in the United States. But of course, now we're in the UK, so we're Sir Duffield. And see, how could a situation be any better than that?
Absolutely. So now, what I've done, I've got a few questions. So because the book is like 449 pages long, excluding acknowledgements, I think, at the end, and it's packed full of stuff. And what I've done is I've just picked out a few things
Great.
that, if we can dig into them, that just give people a little bit of the flavor of the style of the book, because
Sure.
it just feels like a book, but it feels like a reference book and a volume and almost a notebook in of itself. And I think it's fabulous. I mean, but the first thing I wanted to ask was, because it's split into 6 different sections, and one of the first sections you talk about this idea. And it's in 1.6.1, and you talk about lunch and XFX, and that's probably going to sound like some sort of foreign language to most people. So can you tell me kind of what that's about, and why you think it's important?
Well, to jump to the bottom line, as they say,
Yeah,
XFX is cross-functional excellence.
right.
The simple fact is, the demonstrable fact is, the research-based fact is that most things fail or take 4 times longer than they should because the finance people don't talk to the logistics people, don't talk to the human resources people, don't talk to the purchasing people. And it's all those interfaces between the functional specialties that slow things down.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'm arguing is, and it's really important here, this is nitpicky with words, I'm not talking about fixing problems. I'm talking about turning this communication, when it's effective, into the number one differentiator, value-added differentiator of the enterprise. Now, lunch, don't get me started. When people talk about tearing down functional barriers, often as not, or more often than not, they'll start talking about software.
Yeah.
And there are these giant, incredibly expensive things, ERP, enterprise resource planning systems, and so on. And I am not against those in any way, shape, or form, believe me. But at the end of the day, like everything, having communication between finance and purchasing is about people, and it's about relationships.
Yeah.
And so what I say in the book is, what is the number one tool for destroying barriers? Answer: lunch. On average, we have something like 240 working days a year.
Sure.
And to me, that translates into 240 opportunities to meet new people or develop new relationships. And I call these, I've got a whole series of factors, and they're the human factors. But here's my, and I know I'm right about this, here's my point.
Yeah.
You're a finance guy. Yeah. I'm a purchasing guy. Therefore, I think you're an idiot, and you think I'm an idiot. So we're clean on that. But I do call you, say I read the book or what have you. I give you a call and I say, Adrian, look, I know sometimes we're at each other's throats, but let's have lunch.
Sure.
Well, the statistical odds are incredibly high that at lunch we will both discover, among other things, that we have 13-year-old girls who are in the same school and maybe even playing on the same football team.
Sure.
We will develop a personal relationship. We can't not develop a personal relationship. Now, you will continue to be a hard-nosed professional.
Yeah.
And I will continue to be a hard-nosed professional, but we'll be colleagues.
Yeah.
And we'll just talk differently toward each other, and we won't be snippy. And I'll try to help you out, and you'll try to help me out. And that's the essence of this story. I mean, I was, as you know, I use Twitter, and I said recently, I know that things are changing incredibly fast. Speed is everything. Speed is a snare and a delusion. Life has maybe 25 years from now, but forget that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the next 5 to 10 to 15 years. Success at anything is based on relationships, human relationships, and relationships take time.
Yes.
In fact, the best way, I would argue, to speed things up is to slow things down on the relationship side. But, I can just get bright red in the face on this lunch thing. 240 opportunities a year. I mean, you and I are working the same function now, and we're old buddies, and it's really nice to have lunch together and talk about what your kids do and how's your spouse and how's your cousin George. And I am not against that at all. But I'm saying it's an opportunity to meet others.
Yes.
It's an opportunity to learn about the rest of the organization and to be genuinely curious. So, if the word, if there's a word, if there's something called a panacea, for me, the panacea is lunch.
Fantastic. I love that. I mean, it's so simple, but it could have such an impact. So then,
and the evidence basically says that, which is terrific on some dimensions, we tend to hang out with the people we always hang out with.
Yeah.
And if we want to make our work better, I think we can do better than that. Plus, I'm going to end up finding out that you're actually an interesting guy and not the narrow-minded jerk that I thought you were before I called you and invited you to lunch.
Excellent. So then then the next thing I wanted to pick up on is something from the next chapter, and it's 2.6.1, and you talk about excellence of service. I mean, and I love this kind of piece, because it's like, if you imagine, folks, that this is like organized into little tiny kind of paragraphs, and Tom has written, I quote, organizations exist to serve, period. Leaders live to serve, period. Service is a beautiful word. Service is character, community, commitment, and profit. Service is not wow. Service is not raving fans. Service is not a great experience. Service is just that, service. And I thought, I read that and I just went, phew, wow. I mean, what's the thinking behind that one, Tom? Because it's just like, that's like a big punch in the face.
Well, good. I mean, first of all, let me be incredibly clear, which I am in the writing. To some extent, the basic idea is stolen.
Right.
Robert Greenleaf wrote a wonderful book that didn't get the attention it should have, except by some fanatics, called Servant Leadership.
Yeah.
And what it says is that if I have an 11-person team and I'm the chief, I am their servant. My entire goal in life is to make them better and help them get the job done. But, your reaction is A, thrilling to me, but B, it's the same thing I felt. We know what service is. We know what service is in the military. We know what service is when a doctor spends 5 hours at a free clinic on it. Well, free is a little different in the NHS, but the doctor goes out of his way to do some special consulting. Service is this. I'm not a very religious person, or if I am, it's what I call lowercase r.
Sure.
But the essence of human beings being with human beings is all about service. And what I'm saying here, which you picked up on, is let's call it that and let's get turned on by it. I think I'm a lot older than you are, but when somebody gets up to say something nice at a memorial service after you pass away, they don't talk about how much money you made, and they don't say you increased the market share of this or what have you. They talk about what kind of a human being you were. And the thing I've been trying to do for 40 years is to say that humanness is the essence of commercial enterprise,
Sure.
as well as nonprofit and so on, as much as it is of life at home and life with family. And so, as I said, I'm thrilled by your response. It's exactly what I prayed for, with a lowercase p,
Yeah.
because it is a religious tin or a spiritual tin. I don't like the word approach. I don't like the word spiritual in general because I think people go off into woo-woo directions, but it is something deep. Business is people helping other people, right?
Yeah.
Drop service for a minute. People helping other people achieve something they want, whether it's a new hard product or whether it's, banking at Metro Bank or what have you.
Fantastic. I mean, I get it, and I think this is the thing is that, and what I'm finding, or what I found rather, as I went through the book, is just so to the point and in your face, and I love it. And then you can go on, and in 2.9.2, you start building on some of these ideas about sort of service and the roles of organizations and stuff. You talk about excellence and shareholder value, and that the idea that maximizers are going to hold their ground and sway, and all this about this idea about total shareholder returns and things. I mean, I come from an economic background originally, and so I've got sort of quite a detailed understanding of this. But can you explain what you mean by this idea that shareholder value will hold its sway, and also, do you think things like, are you familiar with the recent letter from BlackRock's Larry Fink to their investors about focusing on long-term value and sustainability and purpose?
Familiar, yes, but I haven't read it in detail, but I'm fascinated by it from what little I have read, where he said he's going to use a different yardstick fundamentally. I mean, that's a big that's a big deal.
No, it is a big deal. But do you think it's that we're still enthralled to that sort of total shareholder value or total shareholder returns, or are we seeing a shift now with this idea around the rise in the need for great service and great experience?
Well, first, I would say the first half of your question, yes, I think we're still enthralled to it.
Okay.
I mean, that's the net or the bottom line, as the case may be. But I do think there's some cracks in the edifice.
Right.
You talked about his, and the other one, which was interesting, is the Harvard Business Review ran a piece a few months ago by their ancient, elderly, and incredibly famous Professor Joseph Bauer, who was one of the shareholder value gurus, who said, enough. You know, we're in a different world, and we really have to look beyond that. Now, this is American purely, but what I cited, as you probably recall in the book, was an American law professor by the name of Lynn Stout, who wrote a marvelous little 90-page book called The Shareholder Value Myth.
Yes.
And what it says relative to American law is there is utterly no requirement whatsoever to maximize shareholder value. A corporation may do whatever it chooses to do as long as it is legal. And Jack Welch, for heaven's sakes, who was the guru, god, whatever term you want to use for shareholder value, said in a Financial Times piece a few years ago, I've never come across a stupider idea than shareholder value. You know, that's some kind of an incredible transformation.
Yes.
I don't have your economics training probably, but I do have business school training, and I am a good capitalist who believes in profit, and profit allows you to do all sorts of other things. But it doesn't mean that I was talking to somebody about this recently. Our Fortune magazine has a list of the 100 best companies to work for every year.
Yeah.
And over a 20-year period, only 12 companies have been on all 20 years. And the fascinating thing is those 7 of those 20 companies, incidentally, are not the Googles of the world, but they're people who are in groceries and people who are in hospitality. And the companies that have been on every year for 20 years have financial performance that just knocks the socks off of the, full set of companies.
Sure.
And so, the answer is I don't think we're there. And I think you all have it as we do. There are too many cases of, there was a horrible, I'm told, don't quote me on this. No. I think it's informal. There was a practice inside my beloved McKinsey that was called buy and cut.
Right.
You buy a company, you dump 25,000 jobs, your short-term profit goes through the roof, you take a bonus, and you head for the Bahamas. Yeah. And then the company collapses 2 years later. I think there's still a lot of that going on. But, my fond hope is that we are making inroads. I think on a different plane, and also back to our service conversation a minute ago, the heat that Mr. Zuckerberg is taking at Facebook is another example of, hey, let's think of the moral dimensions of all this. And, I've devoted my life to business. I don't think of business as an immoral activity. I think it, as we said, a service activity to help people. So maybe there's a corner that's been turned. I hope there is, but I'm not wildly optimistic.
Yeah, well, I guess there's a lot of signs out there, and we just got to watch this space and do what we can to sort of to urge it along, I guess.
Well, Adrian, I'm going to follow up on that before you ask your next question by saying something else, which probably comes through in the book, and perhaps it's the subject of another question that's important to me. I think me and my people, the gurus, and incidentally, it was the bloody economist who started that management guru thing, for which I will never forgive them, even though I love the magazine. My people, the business gurus, spend most of their time on the Fortune 500 and the FTSE 100.
Sure.
And the reality is 80% of Brits and 80% of Americans work for so-called SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises.
Yeah.
And if we can make our British, American, French, South African small and middle-sized companies better, providing better services and so on. That's the job creation tool. And I really want to spend, I'm an old guy, but I want to spend a great deal of my time moving forward saying, how can I help the $20 million company become a $30 million company, which in the process creates another 117 jobs. That's a big deal multiplied across a whole economy.
Oh, no, completely. I mean, I remember, Tom, and I kind of met you at that Thinkers 50 event, and you were riffing on this idea about, or rather, you were railing against Fortune 500 companies, saying that you're getting bored with them because you've been saying the same thing for the last sort of 35 years and nothing had changed, and that actually the job creation engine was going to be the SMEs across the world.
Right.
The world. And you talked about your 1 million campaign that you mentioned. So give us a repeat of that riff.
Well, my 1 million campaign is, I was driving past some little shopping center, and there was a list of the companies that were there. And one was a health spa, and one was an accounting services, and one was a tailor, or kind of a bespoke anyway, they were small businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this funny thing that went through my head, and I was thinking, the businesses listed here probably have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or not more than a dozen employees. What if they could add 2 more in the next year or 18 months? And what if 500,000 businesses could up their game and do a little bit better service and the like, and each of those 500,000 businesses could add 2 people?
Mm-hmm.
That to me is really exciting. I mean, obviously 500,000 times 2 is a big number, but just the notion, we have somebody who works on our yard, and he's got about a 9-person business that works with people on making their landscaping better and so on.
Yeah.
And he's terrific.
Mm-hmm.
And what if we could help him do some small things that mean 2 years from now, he's got 17 people on the payroll? That's huge. And so I'm excited by that kind of thinking.
Well, I mean, I tell you what, my mum and dad had their own small business, and it was a garden centre. They had sort of 3 locations: a garden centre, a flower shop, and a garden shop in a neighbouring town. And unfortunately, one thing led to another, and they lost the business. But having an insight into that and the value that small businesses can bring to a community in terms of creating kind of jobs, etc., and I do a lot of work with smaller businesses. I'm a huge fan of your 1 million campaign, and I'll say this out loud and on the record: if you need any help, then count me in.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate that. And you used another word that's critical too, from your own personal experience up close, and that's the word community.
Mm-hmm.
They are the community to a significant extent.
Yeah.
Most of the members of the community work for them collectively. And this whole notion, particularly as we come under attack from different kinds of technology and so on, of really focusing on community growth as well. Mm-hmm. Community growth and good business are first cousins, not something that's antithetical to each other. So many people, when they hear the word profit, they think, well, they're just a bunch of greedy buggers who are trying to increase the thickness of their wallet. Well, some of them are, but by and large, the average small business is probably more like your parents' business, where people care.
Absolutely. So let's go back to the book, and I want to pick up on something you wrote in chapter 3, where you talked about culture and how culture, that is the game, in Lou Gerstner's words of IBM sort of fame. I mean, but in a world of technology and big data and measure everything to death, do we need to win the culture argument again, or is it just hard to do well, or is that just the essence of what it is to be excellent?
I think we need to win the culture argument again every day,
right,
in an organization. Back to Metro Bank.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, one of the interesting things, I hire you for a technical job in Metro Bank, and you have an introductory training course. And the introductory training course is all focused on the bank culture.
Mm-hmm.
I assume that between your training and your boss, you will continue to get better at the technical stuff that you were hired for.
Yeah.
But what I want you to understand is where you're working and what our point of view is. And I want you, who are a finance guy, to realize that customer service for our customers is as important to you as it is to a teller who's standing, 2 feet away from a customer.
Yeah.
So they live the service thing, and they live it one day at a time. And you get indoctrinated, if that's not a bad word, literally at the beginning, and you get reminded of it every day in and out.
Mm-hmm.
And I, again, which is, of course, the thesis of the book, I think it's the best. I don't like the word defense. I like the word offense. I think, or back to our million jobs, I think it's the best way to grow the business, a culture of care, a culture of human development, a culture of customer service. And I'm not arguing that we should not have the latest in technology. I totally believe we should, but I'd love to think the technology is primarily assisting people to provide better service.
Absolutely. And so, let me move on to the next thing I was thinking about. And in chapter 4, about 4.3, you start talking about these companies called, and it's building on this SME theme. You talk about them being small giants. And I wanted to share with you a quote that it occurred to me when I was reading this, and it's a quote from Buddy Guy, if you know who Buddy Guy is.
Yep.
And this is a quote that comes from him after a conversation he had with his father, where his father said, "Don't try to be the best, just be the best you can be until the best comes around." And I thought that beautifully captured some of these small giants that just are. They're not necessarily about size and market share and things. They're about, in your words, about excellence and doing the best job that they can do. And I just thought it was a beautiful quote.
I agree. One of the books that I quoted is called Small Giants.
Yeah.
And the subtitle of the book is Companies That Choose to Be Great Instead of Big.
Yeah.
And each one of the companies in this book, it's written by a friend of mine, Bo Burlingham, but all of the companies he features are so darn good that people have offered them additional financing.
Right.
And said, wow, you can scale this thing, as they say in Silicon Valley. And they've said, no, we really love the ability that we have to serve the community and serve our customers. And I, as I said, it really resonates with me.
Fantastic. So let's move on to the next bit that stood out for me. And I wanted to ask you about a person. I wanted to ask you to tell me about Pat Carrigan and what we can learn from her about leadership.
Well, I'm going to leap ahead a little bit and then come back to Pat.
Okay.
A very central part of what shaped In Search of Excellence was a single visit to Hewlett-Packard where we learned about the HP way. Unfortunately, it's a little bit frayed now at their enormous size. Mm-hmm. The HP way that included this thing called MBWA, or Managing by Wandering Around.
Sure.
And it's a great idea, A, and beyond that, it's a great metaphor for being in touch. So Pat Carrigan was a General Motors automobile plant manager, and she was the first woman to be a General Motors automobile plant manager. And we heard about her, and we were working on a television show, and we went to see her to see what her magic was. And her magic was managing by wandering around writ large, being in touch, talking to the frontline employees. I'll never forget. And this is so trivial, Adrian, but of course, as you know as well as I, it's not. We're in the office of the union boss. I don't know what the structure is there, but the guy who was in charge of the United Auto Workers members in that plant, which was a couple of thousand people. And we were talking to him about Pat. And he said, I knew the difference between Pat and the prior plant managers in about 2 seconds.
Right.
And he said, the day that she arrived, I heard a knock on my office door. And I opened the door, and there was Pat Carrigan, who said she'd like to talk. And I don't remember the number exactly, but I'm going to be pretty accurate. He said, I have been at this plant for 20 years, and I have never had a plant manager call on me in my office.
Right.
I have always been summoned to the throne room. And, and he said she just sat down and we had a chat like old friends, as opposed to, the new tyrant who'd come in to run the company. But, that was the story all the way through. She cared about the frontline people. In return, they killed themselves for her. And she probably, in that instance, I'm not sure what the whole story is 20 years later, but she saved a couple of thousand jobs. It was so great that the state of Michigan, which is, of course, the automobile state in the United States, their state legislature passed a document thanking Pat for her service to the state of Michigan when she retired. That's a pretty big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal. I mean, it's a powerful story, and it just shows that actually great leadership, like, goes back to that whole idea of servant leadership. You're there to help. You're there to serve.
Absolutely. And thinking of an ancient British equivalent, I happen to be a raving, bubbling fan. I was in the Navy of Admiral Nelson.
Right.
And one of the things you always read about Nelson was he was beloved by his sailors.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a tough guy, and the Royal Navy was not a place for people who were other than quite disciplined. But he really cared about them. And he understood, he understood that they were the key to his success. So, this is something that holds 220 years ago at Trafalgar, and it holds today in an automobile plant, or back to our joint dream at that 7-person business that might become a 9-person business.
Fantastic. So, and one final kind of question that's possibly linked to this, because in the same section, there's a part that references hostmanship, which I thought was a really interesting idea. Can you explain to me kind of what that is quickly?
Yeah, I really love it. A couple of management gurus who are Swedes decided to shut up and put their money where their mouth is, as they say, and they bought a hotel.
Right.
And the hostmanship idea is that as a leader, I am the employee's host. It's your service idea or my service idea or Greenleaf service idea taken in a not different direction, but really amplified. I am your host. My goal is to be absurd. You're the 26-year-old at the front line. I am here to be of service to you. Now, the term I like, as well as the host one, is they say the first thing we did when we got to the hotel, and I have to use the words carefully because that's a pair of words that I'd never heard before. We did a consideration renovation. Right. Now, normally when somebody buys a new hotel, what do? They get better linens for the guest rooms. They paint the place. They upgrade this. They upgrade that. Well, these guys said, no, that comes second. The first thing we're going to do is upgrade the facilities and services that we give to our employees.
Yeah.
And they had this wonderful line, and it has to be listened to carefully. They said, do you want as a guest to go to a hotel where the hotel manager is always saying, customers first, customers first? Or do you want to go to a hotel where employees genuinely love their job? And he said, our entire goal is to create an environment where employees are engaged and they care for their customers. And the best way to do that is to, in fact, make it a great. It's funny, I was thinking about a lecture I gave 15 or 20 years ago in the UK, and I went past a hotel, and this is not a criticism of the UK because it's at least as bad 99% of the time in the US. And it was a small hotel, but there was an employee entrance, right. And it was crappy. It was dirty. There was a garbage can. I mean, the hotel was pretty high end.
Yeah.
It wasn't the Mayfair, but it was pretty high end. And I thought, holy smokes, I really want that employee to shine for the customer and to be part of the show. And how do I have her start her day? by wending her way through garbage cans to a door that basically says, "You're a piece of garbage." And my language is strong in that regard, and I realize, but it's this notion of, my demand, I said it to this group. I said, my demand is one of two things. Either the employee comes through the guest door, or the employee comes through an archway that is at least as fabulous and energizing as the one the guests come through, because they're the ones I want to turn on.
Yeah, no. So Tom, let me just say to the people that are listening into this is that I hope those questions and the answers that you've given have given the listeners or readers a taste of what the book is like. And I might add that we've actually only dipped into selectively about a quarter of the book. So that tells you how much stuff and how much insight and how much thinking is in the excellence kind of dividend. So, but if I was to say to you that there's some people that are listening into this and they're thinking, and they're struggling to achieve their own sort of level of excellence in terms of trying to define kind of what good stuff means for them. I mean, where would you advise them to start? I mean, what should they start doing or thinking about?
I know exactly what my answer is.
Okay.
We had, in that excellence chapter that you quoted, we had a little riff that said, excellence is the next 5 minutes.
Right.
Excellence is not a hill to climb. Excellence is not an aspiration. So here's my answer to the question. Excellence is the next email.
Perfect.
Is the email written with care?
Yeah.
Is it civil? Is it thoughtful? Is it somehow or other a little bit inspiring? Because the way the leader does her or his job is one step at a time, one email at a time, one meeting at a time, one interaction at a meeting at a time. I remember reading this thing in a Best Bosses article in the New York Times or in the Wall Street Journal in the U.S. And the woman who was the CEO of this division or company, she said, the most important thing I do in the day is the accidental 30-second conversations I have with employees that I bump into just in the course of the day's work. Mm-hmm. She said, that's the key. It's just the little chat, or as I said, the next email. People are going to say that's insane. And I hope I'm not often arrogant like this. I'm right. An email shows your entire personality, even if it's 3 lines long.
Sure.
Do you care?
Sure.
Do you care? It's just like an exchange with, you want to shoot yourself sometimes when you've really been snippy with one of your children because you had a bad day at work. And, it's that same idea of, the email goes to somebody and you're making an impression.
Absolutely.
And if it's loaded with typographical errors and crappy grammar, even if you went to an English public school, unacceptable.
Absolutely.
It's a mark of excellence or not.
Fantastic. The next 5 minutes, the next email. There you have it, folks. So, Tom, is there anything that you'd like to add that we've missed, you'd like to mention that we've missed out before I ask you my final question?
Well, I was going to say I'm not here to suck up to you, Adrian, but that was as good a list of questions as I've ever confronted. So I think you got a heck of a lot done in the last few minutes.
Well, thank you so much. That means such a lot to me. But here's my final question, Tom, that I always ask people when I have them on the podcast, and we're in excess of 250 interviews now. And the question is this: is there anything that you would like to shamelessly plug?
Well, we're here to talk about it. The Excellence Dividend. It took me 2 years to produce, which isn't true. It took me 52 years to produce. My first managerial job was in the Navy in Vietnam in 1966. So I've been working for 52 years on this book. As you said, from time to time, it has some pretty good stuff. And I'm trying to present the stuff that I've learned and to present it in particular in the context of these wild and crazy times that we are participating in together.
Well, Tom, thank you very much for that. I'll make sure that we get all that sort of linked up and listed up and give you the book as big a shout out as we possibly can. I think it's fabulous. But just wanted to say thank you for your time and for sharing your insight with you, and just congratulations on the new book. I think that's been great.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate your time as well.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new, and I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinsko.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.